restoring men and history. This is a good one today for men, association, and really for all people in America and the Republic, because we need to be associating with each other, and we don't do it as much as we used to. And it's important for your freedom to do it. It's important for the Republic, and it's also important for your health. Now, he's talking about for the Republic, but I'm going to add this. If you're feeling lonely, depressed, isolated, one way to fix that as a man, and it's up to you to fix it, right? Nobody's going to fix it for you, is get involved with men's clubs. Get involved and associate with other men. So let's talk about what de Tocqueville says, how important it is. Chapter 5 of the use which the Americans make of public associations in civil life. Book 2, Section 2. Again, one of the most phenomenal books written, I think. One of my favorites. If each citizen did not learn in proportion as he individually becomes more feeble and consequently more incapable of preserving his freedom single-handed, to combine with his fellow citizens for the purpose of defending it, it is clear that tyranny would unavoidably increase together with equality. So freedom right from the start. How important he's saying combining with other men is for your freedom. And what do you avoid if you combine with other men? Possibly. He's saying you avoid tyranny. Because as equality goes up, he's saying, so do the chances of tyranny. So as men become more equal, the chances of tyranny go up, right? And you can all be equally miserable, like in communism. So that's an enormous reason to get together, protecting your freedom. Those associations only which are formed in civil life without reference to political objects are here adverted to. The political associations which exist in the United States are only a single feature in the midst of the immense assemblage of associations in that country. So remember, he traveled around in 1831. This is 1831. And he talked with all these people and met with these associations. Americans of all ages, all conditions, all dispositions constantly form what he says associations. That's what part of what makes America great are that Americans form associations, and we need to. He says why here in a little bit. It's necessary. They have not only commercial and manufacturing companies in which all take part, but associations of 1,000 other kinds: religious, moral, serious, feudal, extensive, restricted, enormous. The Americans make associations to give entertainments, to found establishments for education, to build inns, construct churches, diffuse books, send missionaries out, hospitals, prisons. He talks about all these. If it be proposed to advance some truth or to foster some feeling by the encouragement of a great example, they form a society. So if it's important to you, you men will go out and form a society to direct your objectives, right? Let's look at that word. Webster states society is a community, nation, or broad grouping of people having common traditions, institutions, and collective activities and interests. So you want to have the same interest in some of these groups around. Or this one is a good one. A part of a community that is a unit distinguishable by particular aims or standards of living or conduct. A social circle or group. So you want to be in a group really with men of virtue, or with a purpose in mind, with particular aims or standards of living, in theory. But it's also just good for men to get out and associate, and women and people in America, to save this republic. They put it in the Bill of Rights for you to be able to assemble. So also the founders and ratifiers thought it was very important, because the ratifiers demanded it, that you be protected, and that the government wouldn't be able to infringe, the federal government wouldn't be able to infringe upon this right for you to meet and peacefully assemble. They wrote it on a piece of paper for you in the Bill of Rights so you could do this, because they thought it was so important. Here de Tocqueville, a Frenchman that walked across the country in 1831, he thinks it's important. wherever at the head of some new undertaking you see the government in France, so he's talking about France, he's from there, or a man of rank in England, in the United States, you will be sure to find an association. I met with several kinds of associations in America, of which I confess I had no previous notion, and I have often admired the extreme skill in which the inhabitants of the United States succeed in proposing a common object to the exertions of a great many men and in getting them voluntarily to pursue it. So these men get together, they need something done, or they want something done, or they believe it's important, and they get it done. And that gives you what? What do we talk about a lot for restoring men? Men need a purpose. You can get with a group and have a purpose in that group, and that gives you purpose. By the way, women like men who have a purpose too, and something larger than themselves, and that are just on their mission and purpose, and that the woman isn't their whole life. So you want to have a purpose. You want to be in a group of men. You want to be doing things. I have since traveled over England, whence the Americans have taken some of their laws and many of their customs, and it seemed to me that the principle of association was by no means so constantly or so adroitly used in that country. The English often perform great things singly, whereas the Americans form associations. Why do you think that is? For the smallest undertakings. Now, if you're doing that in the smallest undertakings, what does that also do? If you're taking charge, you've got a small little group and you do things, what does that do for you as a man, as a woman? Build skills, right? And you need skills as a man. And then you have what? More to offer. And you're able to help the Republic, you're able to problem solve and not send things up or ask for help from the federal government when you shouldn't be. Meaning the state or city or county can take care of their problems. And most of these things are constitutionally supposed to be in the states and local governments. So let's go on. It is evident that the former people consider association as a powerful means of action, but the latter seem to regard it as the only means they have of acting. So in America, he's saying even back in 1831, this is huge, right? Because the government in 1831, think of how much smaller and more constitutional it is. Remember, it was formed, why? To never have a strong parliament and king again, no tyranny. So it was limited government, constrained. They were constraining the federal government. So in 1831, they were more constrained. Look at the federal government today. He's saying it back then, we needed it. So imagine how much we need it today. Just imagine in your head the size of the federal government in 1831 compared to today. Which what? Makes each man smaller in his mind and makes the man feel more powerless. Same with women. So he's saying in America, the only way to get things done is to combine, work with other men, and then pursue an objective. And that may be the only way to protect your freedom. Join other men, combine, protect your freedom. Thus, the most democratic country on the face of the earth is that in which men have in our time carried to the highest perfection the art of pursuing in common the object of their desires, and have applied this new science to the greatest number of purposes. Is this the result of accident, he says, or is there in reality any necessary connection between the principle of association and that of equality? So in America, he noticed, you get more in America accomplished by combining with other men, because there's not as many men of power as there were in Europe, right? They had the aristocracy. They had great men of power. So we'll go on and see what he says. So unlike France and England, And in England and America, even though they didn't really still have, let's see, when he wrote this in 1831, there was still that aristocratic class really going on in Europe. And in England and America, we get together and do things, right? So we ask, is this an accident or necessary here in America? Aristocratic communities, he says, always contain amongst a multitude of persons who by themselves are powerless, a small number of powerful and wealthy citizens, each of whom can achieve undertakings single-handed. So what is he saying? In the aristocracy, there are a lot of poor people, but there's some men who can really do great things on their own singly. Not as often as America, he's saying, in 1831 that he witnessed. So they can go get things done. Here, we've got to combine to get things done. And you saw this in England going through, right? Because who demanded the Magna Carta? The nobles, right? So they achieved it. So they could balance the king. So then England had the aristocratic class, which could balance, fight for their people, right? Because you had the lords and ladies of England, whether they were good or bad, or whether you believe in that system, doesn't matter. The point is, and he goes on, every wealthy and powerful citizen constitutes the head of a permanent and compulsory association. So that the lords had basically a big association, right? All the people who farmed their land, composed of all those who were dependent upon him, and they were dependent upon the Lord, right? Or whom he makes subservient to the execution of his design. So if you've ever watched Downton Abbey and you look at Lord Grantham there, what did he do? He tried to take care of all the people in his community. So he was a good lord, right? You could have good lord, bad lord. We're not commenting on that today. Point is, he had the power. He was a lord to stand for his people. So those men in the community wouldn't have to combine because he was fighting for them against whomever was above them in government, right? Whereas in America, we've got to combine here to have any effect. We aren't Lord Grantham or a lord. We don't have the title, we don't have the position, the wealth. Amongst democratic nations, on the contrary, all the citizens are independent and feeble. They can do hardly anything by themselves, he says, and none of them can oblige his fellow man to lend him their assistance. They all, therefore, fall into a state of what? Incapacity, if they do not learn voluntarily to help each other. So what's he saying? You got to get together or you won't have any help. It's necessary. You can't do everything yourself. All citizens in the United States are weak, feeble. And without association and a club, a group, can't get anything done. Certainly can't try to do huge things by yourself. And you may even need help for simple things. So without a group, you're weak in America. If men living in democratic countries had no right and no inclination to associate for political purposes, their independence would be in great jeopardy. Now let's stop here. If men living in democratic countries had no right and no inclination to associate for political purposes, their independence would be in great jeopardy, he's saying. Right? Look how important he believes in this. You've got to stick together to protect your freedom. That's huge. And look at the books that we've seen come out in the past. In this society, actually, people are atomized. They're going it alone. Now, that's great if you want tyranny. That's great if you want a huge federal government beyond their constitutional powers. Bowling Alone was a book written talking about how lonely and how alone Americans are. Men on Strike about how men were sitting in their basements, okay? Isolating, being alone. In fact, we should talk about that one day. So what are they saying in these books and all these books? Men just aren't getting together again. People aren't getting together anymore. They're not getting together anymore. And there's been a huge increase in what? Loneliness and depression. Man's a social being, right? So sitting alone, isolated, you can start to feel powerlessness. You can lose morale.